At Volkswagen Lease Summit, car buying's as easy as 1, 2, 3. All our new cars are priced to lease at $199, $299, or $399 a month. Plus, we have rates as low as 1.9% for 60 months and used cars for every budget. We make car buying easy. Get to VWLeaseSummit.com.
Happy Monday. It is good to be here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM, streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Donald Trump yesterday sat down with Fox and Friends and was asked whether or not he is okay with finding himself in jail, potentially, in the wake of last week's conviction. And here's what he had to say.
The judge could decide to say, hey, house arrest or even jail.
It could.
How do you face what that could be?
I'm okay with it. I saw one of my lawyers the other day on television saying, oh, no, you don't want to do that to the president. I said, you don't beg for anything. You just, the way it is.
That's absolutely the right answer from Donald Trump. Donald Trump at this point has entered the martyr phase of this campaign. It might ultimately be the thing that wins him the election in 2024. You would like to think that elections come down to policies. But with each passing generation, it seems like we care less and less about policy and more about personality. That could end up destroying us as a country, but in the short term, it is what it is. And the policies of one of these two guys are far superior to the other. So then if you break down the personality, Donald Trump's personality arguably lost him the election in 2020. Now, people have lived through 3.5, 4 years of Joe Biden. They've said to themselves, okay, these policies ain't working, but they still have issues with Donald Trump, the man, with Donald Trump, the personality. And now that Donald Trump has entered the martyr phase of his political life, he should be embracing this. He should be sitting there saying to himself, you know what? If they want to throw me in the can, I'll raise another $50 million, which is what he did last week within, 24 hours after the guilty verdict came down? $52.8 million is what Donald Trump raised within 24 hours after the conviction came down on 34 felony counts. That is a staggering total. That represents more than half of what they raised in the entire month of April. And 30% of those donations were from new people. It's not like it's the same people donating every single time. It's not the same million people saying, here, take my $50. A third of those donors were people who had never donated to Donald Trump. So when he goes on Fox and Friends yesterday and he's like, yeah, you know what? I'll go to jail. Now, do I think he really wants to go to jail? Do I think he really wants to put himself in an orange jumpsuit? No. Do I think some of you, Larry in Prairie Village and others would love to see him in the orange jumpsuit? Yes. Do I think you get excited by seeing Donald Trump in the orange jumpsuit? Absolutely, I do. And for Donald Trump, he'd be better off, of course, on the campaign trail. He'd be better off out there, living his best life, trying to get himself elected. But he should be saying exactly what he's saying because it makes him more of a martyr. It makes him more sympathetic that he has to even answer questions about being thrown behind bars, about finding himself in a jail cell at some point. It makes all the sense in the world, potentially, for him to be of that mindset right now and to be publicly saying that right now as well. So all that to bring up the $52 million that was raised by Donald Trump in the 24 hours after that conviction took place. And just to put this into some perspective for you, the day after Roe got overturned, which you got to go back to 2022 for that, the Democrats raised about $22 million. That's right, $22 million is what they raised. So for Donald Trump to raise 2.5 times that is absolutely enormous when you look at where things are at today heading into 2024. That's a tremendous amount of money. Now, what about the big money donors? What about like the hedge funds, the super PACs, things like that? Are they running away from Donald Trump? No, quite the opposite, actually. Quite the opposite. Here's a story from Charlie Gasparino I want to share with you on KCMO Talk Radio. Headline, Donald Trump's conviction isn't scaring off voters. It's spurring high roller donors to flock to his cause. The headline, I can't tell you if Donald Trump will spend a day in jail after Manhattan jury's guilty verdict on the absurd hush money trial. What I can report with a great degree of certainty is that Trump isn't a guy acting particularly worried about the outcome. In fact, he thinks it's going to propel him back into the White House. That is Charlie Gasparino. That's the read I'm getting from the members of the billionaire and multimillionaire GOP donor class who are hanging with the former and possibly future president, now a convicted felon, at an Upper East Side residence just hours after the perversion of the justice system on Thursday. That is from Charlie Gasparino, who is going to be here on KCMO Talk Radio coming up at 8:05 this morning. He is going to give us a little insight into what the Wall Street donor class is thinking right now about Donald Trump. And it's going to surprise you. The fact that you've got the big money folks, the Wall Street folks, many of who swore him off after January 6th, they're actually out there now saying, I will put my money behind this guy. I am willing to go out there and put my money behind this guy. And by the way, be public about it, and to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. That is unbelievable when you think a lot of these folks would have never dreamed of giving Donald Trump $1 after January 6th, 2021. They said as much publicly. So Charlie's going to give us some more perspective from Fox Business coming up at 8:05 this morning on this very issue. But these last few days, listen, you never say like being called a convicted felon is a good thing. But in large respects for Donald Trump right now, going into this election cycle, it can be. And it likely will be. It's not good for the country. It's not good for us, the American public. But in terms of him exclusively trying to win this election, there are a lot of positives that have already come out from this thing on Thursday. The question is, how far does it go? 913-408-7957. Randy is in Olathe on a Monday. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Pete. I agree 100% with you. I have one big fear, though. I think that July 11th, they're going to, the judge is going to impose some type of harsh penalty on this. I think they're looking for another January 6th happening on July 11th. Kind of staunch this momentum and all that. And I really think the President Trump, I love what he's doing with this martyr thing. I think he also needs to get ahead of this and start talking about, invoking Dr. King if he has to, about nonviolent ways of his supporters handling this situation. He needs to inoculate the country.
There's one way. Donald Trump needs to say this, Randy. It's a good point. There's one way to fight back, and that is at the voting booth November 5th. That's it.
Exactly. And he needs to, every speech he gives, every interview, every surrogate needs to be hitting this every day.
Yep.
Let me handle the court case. You guys focus on the election.
Well said, Randy. All that matters, thank you, is November 5th. That's it. That's all he needs to say. That's what every surrogate needs to say. And I think Trump's been pretty measured, by the way, in terms of how he's talked about that over the last few days. But yeah, I don't think there's any doubt the media is trying to bait somebody or some groups of people or a group of individuals to act like morons. I certainly think that's true. I had a couple of guys working at the house on Saturday, and they were listeners, and they were saying the same thing Randy just said. They were like, listen, we just don't want anyone acting a fool. And I don't think anybody does at this point. We should not want that at all. The only way to get back is at the voting booth on November 5th. Give them such a landslide that they're not going to realize what hit them. That's ultimately what the countdown needs to be about. As for Trump's sentencing July 11th, we'll see. I'm not going to put anything past this judge because, boy, he is a hack and a half, this guy Mershon. 913-408-7957. 614 on a Monday. It is great to be starting off the week here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM with you. Roger Marshall is going to join us at the bottom of the hour because of a pledge that he signed late on Friday. We'll talk to the Kansas U.S. Senator about that in 20 minutes on KCMO Talk Radio. Meantime, we've got some new reporting on when your kid was getting put in masks. How much did the people in charge actually know? How much data did they have about masking your kids? We'll tell you about that coming up on KCMO. Tony Fauci is set to be on Capitol Hill today. I mean, speaking of guys who should potentially be behind Mars, my goodness. Swap Trump, put in Fauci in the orange jumpsuit, for crying out loud. Why don't you? You got to be kidding me. So Fauci is set to testify this morning in front of Congress. And over the weekend, the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, which oversees the subcommittee's work, released transcripts of Anthony Fauci's testimony from a closed-door meeting back in January. Remember, Tony Fauci, the former top health official in this country, amazingly, who was a hero for a bit of time and then quickly, everyone realized he was a little tyrant is what he was. This is a stunning admission from Tony Fauci. He could not, during his closed-door meeting back in January, and this was all released in the last couple of days ahead of his testimony today on Capitol Hill. Tony Fauci could not name one study to support child masking before the pandemic. Fauci was asked, and we've got the transcript here, do you recall reviewing any studies or data supporting masking for children? Fauci responded, I might have, but I don't recall specifically that I did. I might have. The council then pointed to studies and data from the pandemic that suggest masking harmed child development and education. The question was, there's been a lot of studies that have come out since the pandemic started, but specifically on this, there have been significant on kind of like the learning loss, speech development issues that have been associated with particularly young children wearing masks while they're growing up. They can't see their teacher talk. They can't learn how to form words. Have you followed any of those studies? They asked Tony Fauci. He said, no. He went on to say he believes the scientific data on child masking is still mixed. He said, I believe there are a lot of conflicting studies too. That there are those that say, yes, there is an impact, and there are those that say there's not. I still think that's up in the air. I mean, I'm very sensitive to children. Oh, shut up, would you please? He goes, I have children and grandchildren, so I don't want to have anything that would do harm to them. But I think there was a conflicting discussion about the negative impact on speech and formation of the bones of the face, and that, I think, was debunked pretty easily. That is the answer from Tony Fauci. But the moral here is that he had no idea. He didn't have solid data to start masking your 2-year-old. And as someone who had a 2-year-old at the time, COVID hits in March of 20, April of 20, and we only had one kid at the time. Claire was 1.5 years old. Chloe was born, our second was born in May of 21. But I will never forget, flying planes. We flew to see family that summer and for the holidays as well. And for the most part, I will say flight attendants were, at the time, very respectful, and we didn't put a mask on a 1.5, 2-year-old. We didn't do it. I wore my dopey face diaper, but I didn't put it on my kid. I wasn't going to do that. There was one time on one flight that an attendant said, can you please mask up your child? And we put the mask on Claire's face. She was not even 2 years old at the time. And she wore it for about 5 minutes, and then she took it off because that's what kids who are 2 do. And you know what? I wasn't going to put that thing back on. Thankfully, no one ever said anything to us again, but I was not putting a mask on a 2-year-old on an airplane for a 2.5-hour flight. And it wasn't only about masking 2-year-olds. It was about what it did to them and their speech. This also is personal. Our oldest, Claire, has been in speech therapy since she was about 2.5, 3. And she's gotten much better. She's starting kindergarten this year. I mean, she's sharp as a whip. It's not like there's anything wrong, thank goodness. We're blessed about that. But, she has been in speech class for the last 2.5 years or so. She goes once a week. She had somebody come to the house when she was young. And her first year of kind of that pre-K was the COVID year, 20 and the 21. When the teachers were all wearing masks. you could not literally see their mouths. You could not see their faces. And that's during a time when, you are forming your ability to understand what people are saying and also watch their faces and then repeat what they're saying, repeat their words. You're literally, as a child, and we know this now in the wake of COVID, we learned this during COVID. I learned it a lot during COVID. You're watching your parents or the adults around you speak, and you're learning subconsciously how to say words based on what their mouths are doing. And for 8 months, our kids, including mine, didn't have that at a critical age. And Tony Fauci doesn't care. And he had no data to back up what he did. None whatsoever. He didn't understand, didn't care about the learning loss, even though it became very evident very early on that, yes, COVID was a major risk for older people in particular and those who were immunocompromised. But at no point should we have had young people, certainly not under the age of 18, but just young people in general who are healthy, putting on masks or dealing with other people who found themselves in masks. So I'm not trying to beat an old horse here, but Tony Fauci is set to be back on Capitol Hill today. And, as we sit here and talk about people in political power who are dealing with the rule of law right now, Donald Trump's talking about whether or not he should be going to jail over a non-disclosure agreement. Tony Fauci set back a generation of children, and, he might get some tough questioning on Capitol Hill, but that'll be the extent of that. And I know, as well as anybody, that will be the extent of that. It's not going to go any further. But we can't forget, even though it feels like a million years ago, time is weird. I don't know if it feels like it was yesterday or it feels like it was 15 years ago. I had 2 less kids back then than I have right now. So a part of me feels like it's a different lifetime ago. But regardless of that, we sit here today, and as our kids still deal with learning loss and are still dealing with, I think, you've got a lot of young people right now. One of the reasons we've seen an increase in violence in major American cities still stems from COVID 4 years ago, where these young people were 12, 13 years old. They were getting involved with the wrong groups. Now they're 17, 18. They're committing heinous acts of violence. That all stems back to how we handled this country 4 years ago, and it was led by Tony Fauci, who did it with no data. And it's one thing to say, well, you know what? It was an unprecedented situation. He's doing his best. You do not put kids at risk under the guise of, I'm doing my best. You better have the data or something to back it up, and he didn't. So we'll see how that goes today for Tony on Capitol Hill. Forget the fact that the country's going to hell in a handbasket. The biggest reason Trump needs to win is because I want to see the Chiefs go to the White House and meet a real macho man next year. That's what I want to see on a Monday morning. Good morning. It's great to be here on KCMO. Of course, the Chiefs, have won 3 Super Bowls in recent memory. Unfortunately, the year they won it when Donald Trump was in office was the pandemic year. So they never went. And then they've won the last 2. And they've met Joe Biden. They did on Friday. And for the most part, it was embarrassing. It was sad. I don't take a lot of joy in watching Joe Biden try to put on a Chiefs helmet. And as I'm watching this, if you didn't see the video of the Chiefs meeting with President Biden on Friday afternoon at the White House, it was just bizarre. It was sad. It was very evident at times that the Chiefs players were not laughing with the president, but rather at the president. Andy Reid hands Joe Biden a Chiefs helmet. He's standing there with Clark Hunt and the team's behind him, Brett Veach and the whole gang, Mahomes, everybody else. And as Joe Biden is putting on this Chiefs helmet, it reminded me of guys who played high school football when coaches would send clearly concussed players back into the game. He's holding the helmet. He's falling over, swaying either way. He's trying to put it on his head. It's not going on straight. It was like Billy Bob in Varsity Blues is what it was. As I'm watching this thing, I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is Billy Bob in Varsity Blues as he's trying to pull the helmet over his head. And this is what it sounded like, by the way. Oh, there you go. Hey, he finally pulled the helmet over his head. It's like, what are we doing here?
He tried putting them on with the sunglasses, and they were about to crush the sunglasses, so he had to throw the sunglasses down, and then
Yeah, Joe had to put the aviators aside for a second. Yeah, he tried to pull the helmet over his head with the aviators on. He hands the aviators to Andy Reid, and then he's like, fumbling and mumbling and trying to pull the helmet over his head, and finally, the players in the background are like, hey, he did it, woo! Old man puts helmet on head, congratulations. Like,
I thought he was going to tip over.
No.
That thing looked huge on him.
It did. It did.
And I thought that's all we need is him to start leaning backwards, Whoops.
There's President Kamala coming in strong. She knew she was going to get him at some point. It was only a matter of when. It's like I'm watching this thing, and listen, Clark Hunt and Andy Reid are pros. They handled it exactly like they should have. They kept all the partisanship out of it. They were respectful of the day and the office and the White House, and they were all smiles. And as far as I could tell, everybody handled themselves pretty well. But I'm sitting here from afar watching back in Kansas City, and I'm like, as funny as this is, and as much fun as we'll have with this on Monday, the guy's the leader of the free world, for crying out loud. Now, Travis Kelce was invited up to the podium. You knew that Joe was going to try to, goose up Kelce a little bit. He's looking for his girlfriend's support here come November 5. So he had to single out Travis Kelce, get him up to the White House podium. But Travis, to his credit, I didn't know what he was going to do. I didn't know what he was going to say. He handled it pretty damn well.
Travis, come here.
Give me your girlfriend's number so I can get her to vote.
Fellow Americans, it's nice to see you all yet again. I'm not going to lie, President Biden, they told me if I came up here I'd get tased, so I'm going to go back to my spot, all right?
And that was the extent of that interaction. I'm not quite sure what he was going for there, but I think Kelce realized I'm better off saying less in this setting based on what people might be assuming or watching for, and, knowing some of the background with Travis, his previous endorsers, his girlfriend's political leanings. So he got himself out of there pretty quickly, which is unlike Travis, and I respect that.
Last year on his podcast, he said all he's ever wanted to do is say, my fellow Americans, from the podium. So he did it.
Oh, and that's what he wanted to do?
Yeah.
Did he do it last year?
He tried, but Mahomes kind of pulled him back.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I remember that. Mahomes pulled him back. Well, you never know what the guy's going to say with a live mic. So he got to stand up there and say, my fellow Americans. And then he went back to his spot. All right, I can respect that. He got his jollies in. He said, my fellow Americans. All right, good for Travis. After the offseason he's had, that's the least controversial thing he's done the last 5 months. So good for him. That's good stuff.
So Biden got the jersey last year, the helmet this year. If he wins next year, hopefully, he doesn't. But if he does, they want to give him, a jock strap.
Is that what they want to do?
No, one of my friends said that.
Oh.
I thought it would be kind of funny if they give him a jock strap next year.
Well, as far as I can tell, there ain't much to put in that jock strap these days for Pops. But, that's a conversation for another day. Now, this was an awkward part of the entire Chiefs-Joe Biden meeting. Let's take a listen to what he had to say here.
I want to welcome all the Chiefs fans here today. Governor Kelly,
Okay.
members of Congress, including my good friend Congressman Cleaver.
So he only welcomed and said hello to the Democrats who were in attendance, and Governor Kelly, the governor of the state that does not even house the Chiefs, technically, got a big warm welcome. Now, I don't know if Mike Parson was there or not. I don't think he was, because Mike Parson is a big Chiefs fan, and he posts a lot of Chiefs stuff on social media, but I have not seen anything from Mike Parson on his social media suggesting that he was at the White House on Friday. Now, what he was doing, could he not make it? I don't know. I'm not going to make any assumption that he wasn't invited, but I do find it weird because I know Mark Alford was there, And I find it weird that Joe Biden, Mr. Unity, which is what he ran on 4 years ago at this point, made sure to thank two people from different sides of the state line, both who happen to be of his political affiliation, Democrats. Governor Kelly, the governor of the state that is not even the home of the Chiefs, and then Emmanuel Cleaver. Now, that's his district. I'm okay with that. That's cool. But you would think if you're going to give credit to the guy whose district it is, you would also give credit to the governor whose state the team actually plays in. But it's not clear to me Mike Parson was there. Was he not there because he couldn't make it? Was he not there because he wasn't invited? I'll have to reach out to the office this morning and find out. That's on my to-do list this morning in between the 17 meetings that get put on my plate after the show. So I'll figure that out. But I was like, okay, that's a little awkward, is it not? But I'm glad Governor Kelly had a good time, as she, by the way, tries to probably poach the Chiefs at some point in the months ahead. So that is something to watch. 9:04 as we hit the 9 o'clock hour on a Monday morning on KCMO. Thanks for joining us and starting your week here on 95.7 or on the KCMO Talk Radio app. So Donald Trump, of course, they now can call him a convicted felon. That's right. And can you imagine the cocktail parties over the weekend where they did a little cheers to Donald Trump being a convicted felon? And if you think this is where it ends, you're kidding yourself. You're not paying attention. This is in large part just where it begins. And Josh Hawley was on late Friday night. You probably missed it, on with Laura Ingraham. And here's what our Missouri U.S. Senator had to say in the wake of Donald Trump's conviction.
Yeah, now, Laura, we've entered the phase where Joe Biden says in order to save democracy, he has to cancel democracy. In order to preserve the right of the people to govern, he's got to throw his opponent in jail and make sure the people don't have a choice in November. I mean, this is something we've never seen before in American history. Our election process is supposed to end with an election, not with throwing your opponent in jail. No American president's ever done this before. I mean, Joe Biden has tried to make us a third world country. And I'll just say this, Laura, these same Democrats, I thought 24 hours ago, were mounting a full-on assault on Justice Samuel Alito and the Supreme Court, calling for recusal, calling into question the court's decisions. Why? Because they didn't like a flag that Justice Alito flew. But now, all of a sudden, this verdict is sacrosanct? I mean, give me a break. It's a total rig job, and they know it.
Give me a break, says Josh Hawley very emphatically. He put a little bit of that Josh Hawley charm on it there at the very end. Little dramatic, but I like it. And he's in large part right. And here's what's going on with the Supreme Court. He's right to bring that part up because there is a discrediting of the Supreme Court that is at play here, and it has been for several weeks. Why? In large part because if this Donald Trump conviction does get to the Supreme Court and they overturn it, they've been laying the foundation for calling out the Supreme Court and delegitimizing and illegitimizing the Supreme Court. They're always a step ahead. They're not dummies, I mean, they are in many respects, but the way they kind of put together their game plan is typically one step ahead. So they've been going after Alito. They've been going after Clarence Thomas for years at this point. Holy cow. But especially as of late as well. So they continue to chip away at the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. They talk about adding justices, stacking the court, the whole thing. And if this Trump case does get to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court calls it out for what it is, well, then they go from chipping away at the legitimacy of the Supreme Court to taking a sledgehammer to it. No more chipping away. That's what this would ultimately then come down to if we do get to that point. But they'll have done the dirty work and laid the foundation for the whole thing, John.
Sure, it's always the bigger picture. You know, right? And sometimes what's funny is because I'm trying to guess where the bigger picture. Sometimes they trip over their own you-know-what and actually get lucky and continue on with their success. Because there are a lot of times when they've hit the wall that's like the Road Runner, where the train coming down the thing and the coyote runs into the cave. Right?
They have done that many times as well.
A couple of times, haven't they?
I put this up on my Facebook page Friday night. And it was a tweet from Joe Biden in the middle of the week. It was on Thursday. And Joe Biden tweeted out, The Supreme Court tried to block me from relieving student debt, but they didn't stop me, he puts on Twitter.
That's a great example.
And the next day, Joe Biden tweets out, this is the day after Donald Trump's conviction, no one is above the law. I mean, if you, it makes
I'm
you
getting pissed
I
off.
know that's how I feel too, but it's also hysterical. They're telling you exactly how they feel. That's the last couple of days in a nutshell. Joe Biden saying the Supreme Court basically told me I couldn't do what I'm doing, and I'm still doing it anyway. And he brags about it. And then a day later, talking about Donald Trump. No one is above the law, John.
Yeah, it's kind of like the teenagers suspended. You know, you can't drive the car, but they're out driving their friend's car. And they say, well, you said I couldn't drive our car.
Yeah.
It's that crap.
That's
it's very adolescent when you think about it.
That's what they do. But their friends in the media protect them.
Well, sure.
Yeah. So they're not going to call them out.
No.
You know, they're not going to do that. Will Scharf, who is running for Missouri Attorney General, he's one of Donald Trump's attorneys. He was on with George Snuffleupagus over the weekend on ABC. And he brought up a point that we made clear on Friday, that it does appear like there are Biden people who are very much in the weeds on this case with Alvin Bragg, who is the Manhattan DA, who ran on doing this to Donald Trump and then ultimately did do it to Donald Trump and brought the charges after Donald Trump was the prohibitive favorite for the Republican nomination at the end of last year. Here was Will Scharf running for Missouri Attorney General going up against Snuffleupagus on ABC.
And of course, the Attorney General in Manhattan has nothing to do with the Department of Justice. Finally, what do you expect from the sentencing process?
I vehemently disagree that the district attorney in New York was not politically motivated here, and I vehemently disagree that President Biden and his political allies aren't up to their necks in this prosecution. I think the fact
there's
that
no
the Biden
evidence of that,
campaign was-
sir. There's no. I'm not going to let you continue to say that. There's just zero evidence of that.
Well, how about the
DA
fact
in
that
Manhattan
Matthew
is
Colangelo was standing over Alvin Bragg's shoulder when he announced this verdict? I mean, Colangelo was the number 3 official in the Biden Department of Justice who suddenly disappears and shows up as an assistant district attorney right as Trump's case in New York starts to proceed.
After
you want
the
to talk
decision
about
was
political
made,
you want to talk about political coordination?
This has nothing
George,
to do.
right
This
there
has
in front
nothing
of
to
you.
do. No, it's not. This has nothing to do with President Biden. Do you want to answer the question about the sentencing process or not?
I completely disagree that this has nothing to do with President Biden. With respect to sentencing, as I said before, we're going to vigorously challenge this case on appeal. I don't think President Trump is going to end up being subject to any sentence whatsoever, and we look forward to getting this case into the next court and taking this again all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary to vindicate President Trump's rights.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Appreciate it, George.
That's Will Scharf, Missouri candidate for Attorney General, one of Donald Trump's attorneys, on with George Snuffleupagus on ABC yesterday, where he's not having any, you can't say.
I'm not going to let you get away with that.
Yeah, I will not let you get away with that. Not on this show, young man. Okay, George. And as he brings up, the name Matthew Colangelo is an important one to know. The guy was number 3 in Joe Biden's Department of Justice, and he left after Alvin Bragg brought charges and joined his case in New York. Who the heck leaves the number 3 position in the DOJ to go help some low-level DA go against the president, his former boss's chief political opponent, and likely nemesis in the 2024 election? And you tell me the people in charge have nothing to do with this? There's no politics at play here? Come on. How dumb do you have to be to believe that?
We've got to prove election interference by interfering with the election so that the dictator can't appear on the ballot. Isn't that funny? Everything they say is if you just flip the mirror, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he's going to be a dictator. No, you're trying to keep him off the ballot and be the only party up for election.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, too. I saw this circulating over the weekend on this front, a cover of Time magazine that shows Bill Clinton with his head in his hands with George Stephanopoulos over his right shoulder. And it's a picture of the two guys, cover of Time magazine. And it says, Deep Water, How the President's Men Tried to Hinder the Whitewater Investigation, with a picture of Stephanopoulos. How about that? But you know what? Here's the thing. When you're on his side, you just keep getting, cushy gigs. Just keep getting raises and cushy spots, and no one ever calls you out. Life's good. It's all set, man. 913-408-7957. And then there's Donald Trump, who said over the weekend that he is more than willing to go to jail. Should he be? Is that good for him? What does it mean? We'll get to it next on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio.
The judge could decide to say, hey, house arrest or even jail.
It could.
How do you face what that could be?
I'm okay with it. I saw one of my lawyers the other day on television saying, oh, no, you don't want to do that to the president. I said, you don't beg for anything. You just, the way it is.
That's Donald Trump. Yesterday morning, Fox and Friends saying, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with jail time. And by the way, from a purely political perspective, he should be. Look at what's happened over the last few days. He raised $52 million in 24 hours after the conviction. 30% of that money came from first-time donors. To put that into perspective, the day after Roe got overturned, Democrats raised $22 million in a single day. Donald Trump raised 2.5 times that in his first 24 hours after his conviction. So now he finds himself in this position where he's going into the next few months as a somewhat sympathetic figure, which is very difficult to do for Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump can't make himself as sympathetic as his political opponents have over the last bunch of months. Capped off by this conviction from last Thursday. It's working for him. Now, of course, there's some danger that could come along with that, but could you imagine Donald Trump sitting in a jail cell at any point over the next few months? Even if it's for a day, I don't care what it is. Now, there's a lot of reports suggesting that Donald Trump's not going to spend any time in prison. Now, his sentencing is 4 days before the RNC, Republican National Convention, begins on July 15th. So I don't think that timing is a coincidence. Nothing is a coincidence in this story. But you look at it now from afar and you say, okay, politically speaking, it would be good for Donald Trump. Is it risky for him? No doubt about it. Are there people who are going to say, I can't possibly vote for a guy who's just been in prison? Like, even if I think it was ridiculous, the guy was just in a jail cell. I can't come out here and vote for him right now. There might be some of those. But I would venture to guess, in a near 50-50 split, which this country is right now, there's a lot of people who are anti-establishment, anti-elite, who aren't necessarily Republicans or Democrats. Maybe they're libertarians. Maybe they're Green Party folks who are going to look at the jailing of political opponents and say, this is completely insane. This is third world-esque. This is Banana Republic-esque. This is not the kind of stuff that America was founded on. In fact, it's the antithesis of everything America has been for the better part of 248 years. And that will turn people in favor of Donald Trump. It's entirely possible. And that's why he's saying what he's saying. Now, do I think Donald Trump wants to spend a minute in a jail cell? No. But I think, one, he's smart to say that. He's smart to say, I'm okay with it. Because once again, it conjures up feelings for his supporters. It conjures up feelings for people who maybe don't like him but think this whole thing is ridiculous. And it makes him semi-sympathetic. He's not going to go out there and say, I'm afraid to go to jail. I can't wear my red tie. Like, he's not going to say that. He's got to say exactly what he said yesterday on Fox and Friends. And he's smart to say exactly what he said on Fox and Friends. 913-408-7957 as we roll through the 9 o'clock hour here on KCMO Talk Radio. Randy's first up. He is in Napoleon. What's up, Randy? Go ahead. You're on KCMO Talk Radio.
Hey, I think Donald Trump's new mascot ought to be a honey badger. Dean Phillips, who ran for president, actually contacted Governor Hochul and asked her if she would pardon him because they literally locked themselves in a room with a honey badger, and some of the Democrats are crying uncle already. They're like, you don't understand. You're going to make this man a martyr on top of everything else. So, yeah, Donald Trump being locked in a room with him is a bad thing for Democrats. So I think they're starting to want to let him go.
Yeah, they should be. I think they certainly have overplayed their hand here. But I wonder if they also think that, listen, they know what they have and don't have in Joe Biden, right? Everybody knows how weak of an incumbent he is. They have to run a campaign that is focused on Trump. They can't run a campaign about Joe Biden. So if all their messaging is going to be around Trump, the convicted felon, it might work just enough with the low information voter to eke out a victory, where they literally use convicted felon, convicted felon, convicted felon time and time and time and time again in everything they do. TV, radio, digital, they're going to use it all across the board. And they may figure that's their best bet. But there also is a clear backlash here. And as Charlie Gasparino said last hour on the show, which if you missed it, you can listen to the interview on the podcast, the big money, it's not just the grassroots, the small donors that are coming out in favor of Donald Trump right now. Wall Street, big money, is not scared of giving Donald Trump's campaign money. You know why? In part, obviously they think that Trump's policies are better for them and their businesses, but it's also that they see themselves in Donald Trump. They're like, hey, if you're the CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in some capacity in a place like New York, and you've got this uprising against the elites and DAs are being used as political pawns in this game, they say, why can't that be me? And there's a relationship there that suddenly is building between Donald Trump and some of these massive donors on Wall Street and also in big tech who couldn't stand him 4 years ago. And that money matters a lot. That's money that will go into super PACs that will be used in important ways over the next 5 months in this election cycle. Mike, let's go. Where do we want to go here? Give me a number there, John. We got a full line. You want me to just roll in order? No pressure. No pressure. All right. Here we go. Walter, Spring Hill. Go ahead, Walter.
Hi. I'm basically here to say that there's a saying in the black community that there's justice and then there's just us. And I think a lot of blacks are turning to Trump because of the fact that he's being treated like, a lot of the blacks have felt for years. And what's weird is that the Democrats just don't seem to get it. And they're going to make him more popular, or if they haven't already, which basically they have. I don't know what they're thinking or what have you, but he's definitely. I voted for him twice, and I will vote for him again.
And you say this as a black man.
That's exactly.
All right.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Walter.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate you, man. Evan in Kansas City's next up. Evan, go ahead. You're on KCMO.
Good morning, Pete. I thought it'd be funny if Trump did go to prison, because then he'll get buff again, just like his WWE days. During some of his, talk shows, like, you see these guns, these ain't just for talking.
Well, he was out. Thanks, Evan. He was out at the UFC fight the other night, UFC 302 in Newark, New Jersey. You got a hero's welcome, by the way. It was entertaining, if nothing else. I say this as somebody who voted for Donald Trump, obviously 2 previous times, but I was a Ted Cruz guy in 2016. 2020 was kind of a mess where we all kind of had that fatigue a little bit. I think I'm more excited now. And that's as someone who was very open to a Ron DeSantis the last few months. And that's not because of anything Trump's done, but because of what his political enemies have done.
At Volkswagen Lease Summit, car buying's as easy as 1, 2, 3. All our new cars are priced to lease at $199, $299, or $399 a month. Plus, we have rates as low as 1.9% for 60 months and used cars for every budget. We make car buying easy. Get to VWLeaseSummit.com.